No sound.
Okay. Thank you.
Imagine serving more than 20 years in prison for a crime you did not commit.
That's what's happened to Timothy Atkins. Atkins, though, was one of the lucky ones. Believe it or not, he found some advocates in the California Innocence Project who believed his story. 10 News digital correspondent Kim Edwards visited California Western School of Law and the students who make the idea of freedom reality.
Oh, Jesus. At this moment, no one on earth could have been happier than Joyce Boney and her son.
It's over with now.
Amen.
I can be back with my family.
Timothy Atkins, back in the arms of those who love him most, freed last Friday after serving 23 years in prison for a crime he did not commit.
I know I was innocent, and I kept praying and believing.
And he wrote to the California Innocence Project. Atkins was convicted of murder as a teenager based on one woman's wrongful testimony.
And when she recanted, she was so credible.
Wendy Cohen tracked down the solitary witness who recanted her trial testimony.
At times, it felt like you're climbing the face of a rock with your bare fingers and toes.
The Innocence Project, based at California Western School of Law, has freed 5 people since 2000, but so many more need help.
We have one very simple goal, and that is to figure out who is innocent in the California correctional system and to get them out of prison.
This is recruitment day. Prospective team members talk with project directors and hear from law students.
And even if you don't free them, they're so thankful for what you've done for them, and it kind of tears me up. But
students who have already had the moment that some will wait a career to experience.
We actually got to see a man released, and that is our ultimate goal.
I don't know what was on her conscience. It probably was eating at her, but, I kept praying about it, so I'm thinking that everything came from up top.
Justice is late, very late in Timothy Atkins' case, but when it finally arrived, the California Innocence Project delivered first class.
So what I felt was relief, and I didn't know how much weight I was carrying on my shoulders until that moment, and it was beautiful.
Kim Edwards, 10 News.
Just an incredible story. The Innocence Project.
All right. I'm Michael Pearson. I will be moderating tonight, and we are so fortunate. We are just thrilled and amazed to have, we actually have Timothy Atkins here on the panel today. And I was going to introduce him to talk, I did a little research on him. I wanted to introduce him and tell his story, but I think it's more powerful coming from him. Just a couple quick notes about Tim. He was 17 years old in 1987 when he was convicted of 2 counts of robbery and 1 count of murder. He served over 23 years, more than half of his life in prison, in California State Prison, before he was exonerated. And the interesting part about Tim's story is that it didn't even end there. Once he was out, it didn't end there. He was released in February 9th, 2007, and charges were actually dismissed in April, but he filed a victim's restitution compensation for the state for all the time that he spent, more than half his life in prison. And that opened up a whole nother fight with the state fighting him not to give him compensation for the wrong that had been put upon him and for changing his life. But I'm happy to say in July 2019, he was awarded $1.1 million in back compensation. I don't think that comes close to replacing or repaying 23 years of incarceration. So our first guest that we have is Timothy Atkins. Okay, and before I start with Tim, we also have another very special guest. We have Alex Simpson of the Innocence Project. He's associate director. He's been with the project since 2001. He is a graduate of the University of California, Santa Barbara. It's not UC Berkeley, but it's okay, Alex. We'll let you slide with Santa Barbara. He received his Juris Doctorate and LLM from California Western School of Law. And before joining the project, Alex briefly worked at the Federal Defenders of San Diego. In his role as associate director, Alex oversees all the day-to-day operations of the project, litigating cases with his fellow staff attorneys and working for policy change. So that's kind of the purpose, is to affect policy change and to free innocent people. He's authored a number of law review articles relating to wrongful convictions, covering topics such as compensation, post-conviction DNA testing, the standards for bringing claims of new evidence before the courts. And over the course of his career, he's been successful in exonerating many wrongfully convicted people. And we are so lucky to have Alex as part of our panel today. And we have one more guest who will be joining us in about 15 minutes. And it's State Senator Nancy Skinner, and we will introduce her once she is on the call. So immediately, my first question is to Tim, is what happened to you? Why are we here? What happened to you back in 1987?
I mean, well, and back then I made some bad choices and decisions. I mean, I could blame my situation on the witness that testified against me. I could blame it on the detectives. I could blame it on the justice system. I mean, they take some blame in it, but I also had to take some blame in it as well. Because being 17, had I made the right choices and decisions, I would have been in the house instead of running the streets. So by me being out on the streets, it made it easy for them to even give me a case like that. You know, even though I was innocent, I still shouldn't have been out there. If I would have been where I belonged, that would have never happened.
Okay. I know you're admitting to, you made some mistakes, but 23 years for running with the wrong crowd do you think 23 years was justified?
No, I mean, I don't believe that anything can justify that. But I mean, if you look back at those times, back then, anybody that went inside the courtroom and it was told to the judge or the jury or anybody that this person is a gang member, then automatically they're guilty, regardless of what it is, because of the stuff that was going on. And when I say I made some bad choices and decisions, at a young age, I joined the gang, but I wasn't a killer. I've never taken a life. I've never shot anybody, anything of that nature, but I should have been in the house. I shouldn't have been running the streets. I mean, that doesn't justify them giving me a case that I didn't do. But I mean, that's what was going on at the time.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to come back to that. So Alex, what is the California Innocence Project?
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you so much for letting me come speak to you and to talk about some of these very serious issues that really relate to all of us. The criminal justice system is kind of like this big machine, and a lot of wheels and cogs and things that kind of people get sucked into and have a very difficult time extricating themselves. And part of that is by design. The criminal justice system is really, really difficult to understand. It's a complex system, just like any other thing, right? If you want it done fast and you want it done right, then you have to spend a lot of money. Or if you don't want to spend a lot of money and you want it done right, then you have to take a long time. And we've kind of taken this weird approach where we don't want to spend a lot of money and we want it to done really fast, and that means that we're not very accurate. And that's when the California Innocence Project comes in. We look at wrongfully convicted people, investigate their cases, try to figure out what went wrong with the case, and try to get them out of prison for crimes they didn't commit. We also have a desire to educate law students and individuals in the public about the causes behind wrongful convictions. That's one of our missions. And finally, we are trying to effectuate policy to prevent wrongful convictions from happening across the state. You know, Tim's case is an interesting one, and I think he's being a little bit generous to the investigators in the case. You know, Tim's case was, you know, he was a 17-year-old kid living in Venice at the time. There was an individual who was shot and killed in Venice. There was a witness that the police found and brought in and said to the witness, "We know that you know who committed this murder. And if you don't say who committed this murder, then we're going to bring you up on drug possession and prostitution charges." And so what this person did was, because she had seen Tim earlier that evening, had just decided to pick out his photo and the photo of his co-defendant because she felt as though if she didn't do something and pick somebody out, that she wasn't going to leave that room. And so, you know, it's the type of thing that unfortunately you see very often in the criminal justice system, that there is pressure applied to people who are very vulnerable to try to get a case to make it very easy to prosecute. That witness, by the way, testified at Tim's preliminary hearing and was so distraught about the lie that she had presented that she actually didn't show up for trial. And her preliminary hearing testimony was read into the transcript for the jury's consideration. So it was, and when we found her, as you saw in that video, Wendy Cohen, my former student, said, you know, when we found her 20 years later, she said she was so thankful that she had the opportunity to do this wrong, you know, that it had really kind of, this was the turning point of her entire life that caused her to spin out into a lifetime of prostitution, drug use, drug abuse, all that sort of thing. So it's that type of thing that we see in wrongful convictions, you know, kind of systemic issues that really kind of put the screws to people who are really unfortunate and don't have the means to extricate themselves from that system. Mike, I think you're muted, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you. So Tim, I want to ask, when did you realize that you were going to prison for a crime that you did not commit?
I realized that at my preliminary hearing, because at the preliminary hearing, they had the surviving victim there, and the DA asked her, did she see the people in the court, the perpetrators in the court that robbed her and shot her husband? And I was the only person sitting in the court next to my attorney in a red jumpsuit. And she sat up on the stand and she was looking in the audience, and she couldn't identify anybody. They took a recess, went in the hallway, brought her back in, and posed that same question to her. Then she pointed at me. So I knew right then that things weren't, it just wasn't right.
Were you thinking the whole time that they're gonna know I didn't do this? They're gonna find evidence. They're not gonna convict me for this.
Yeah, the morning that I got arrested, it was an officer at the police station that seen me handcuffed to the bench. And he walked by me, then he came back. He like, "Do you know what they got you for?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you know, they got you for murder. I know you didn't do that. I know you." He said, "I chase you from time to time when I used to try to sell marijuana." You know, a lot of police down there knew, but they knew I wouldn't have killed him. You know, but I didn't even know that I was being arrested for murder until that officer told me that while I was handcuffed on the bench in the police station.
Wow. And you actually went to prison, adult prison, not juvenile hall. Is that what happened?
First I went to the California Youth Authority until I was 25. Then I went to prison.
And when you were going through this, how'd you get through all these dark times of being wrongly convicted in prison?
I mean, I had my moments of where, you know, at times I felt as if I didn't care about nothing, you know, that I couldn't believe what was going on, what was happening. So for me, at one point I thought about giving up, but I mean, I couldn't do it. It was just something in me that just wouldn't let me give up.
Okay, and how did you find the Innocence Program, Innocence Project?
Well, when I was in Soledad, childhood friend came up there and he told me, he said, man, you know you didn't do that. You know, you need to write letters to different organizations trying to, you know, get you some help. There's organizations out there that'll help you. He said, because everybody in Venice knows that you didn't commit that murder. You know, so you should try to get you some legal help. And I didn't know anything about the California Innocence Project until he told me about it. He helped me write a letter. And the first letter that I wrote somebody in New York. I believe it was a preacher or somebody. I wrote a bunch of different organizations. And some of the letters that I received back was nasty. You know, where you probably deserve this and this, that, and the other, you know, your gang member and, you know, all this other stuff. But I didn't let that stuff discourage me. You know, I just kept writing letters and I was just writing them, you know, wholeheartedly being truthful about my whole situation. Until I received a letter from the California Innocence Project telling me that they would take my case. And after they took my case, Barry Sheck wrote me and told me that he would take it, but I wrote him back and told him that they had already took it.
Okay. All right, and Alex, that leads me to, how do you select your cases? How does the Innocence Project select their cases, and how did you find Tim?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so the California Innocence Project looks through about 2,500 to 3,000 individual requests for assistance a year. And of those, and people just like Tim, people who've been convicted and they're sitting in prison and they are trying to establish their innocence. Of those, we whittle it down to maybe 200 that we do any kind of active investigation on. And what we are looking for is really two things. Number one, do we believe that you are innocent of the crime? And factually innocent, not just kind of technically innocent or that sort of thing. And number two, can we prove it? And that's why that 3,000 gets to about 200, is that many of the cases that we look at, we just can't establish the person's innocence. The witnesses have passed away or the evidence has been destroyed. There's no longer things to do in the case. You know, Tim's case jumped out at us almost immediately because this was a case that was extremely shaky from the start. You know, Tim, so this person was murdered on New Year's Eve, and it was a very sad case. Two people came up to the car that this victim was sitting in with his wife. One of the perpetrators came, opened the driver's side door, said, you know, give me your money, give me your wallet. And apparently wasn't moving fast enough and shot the husband in the chest and kind of pushed him onto the to his wife. And then ran away with a necklace and some other items. The victim and the surviving victim said that she could only have seen the perpetrators for maybe 1 to 2 seconds. It was a cross-racial misidentification. If you know anything about eyewitness identification, eyewitnesses are terrible at being eyewitnesses. And I am sure you in your own life have probably mistakenly seen, you know, somebody you think is a friend of yours, something like that. They turn around, it's not them. So a stranger eyewitness identification, especially cross-racial identification, is very, very difficult to be accurate. So there were some problems with the evidence that was presented in terms of the witness in the case. The number two thing that was very obvious to us was that this person that I talked about previously, who had said that Tim had basically confessed to having committed the crime, was just not very believable. The story didn't really make sense. And when we spoke to her, she said categorically, the police told me that if I didn't say who committed this crime, I wasn't going to leave the room. So, looking at that case, a very shaky case with a lot of evidence of showing that that another person had committed the crime, that was the type of case that for us was very easy to establish the innocence. Trying to establish in a court that the conviction should be reversed was difficult. It took a couple of years. But we're very thankful that we were successful.
Okay, so you said that you start off with a large pool of cases and then you kind of whittle it down. But you mentioned that you only take the cases that you think you can prove. So what about the cases where you really believe that these people are innocent, but you don't think you can actually prove that they're innocent? What happened to these cases?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the toughest things that we have in our office. We have the unbelievable privilege of being able to select our clients. And, when I'm speaking to public defenders' offices or to people who provide legal services, I acknowledge that one of the greatest things for our office is that we can pass on a case that we don't believe truly in the person's innocence. But it's a double-edged sword because we often do believe that the person is innocent and we simply can't prove it. And that is an extremely difficult conversation to have. It is a conversation that I've had multiple times. And you can imagine every time that we pass on a case, essentially, we're looking at murder cases, we're looking at life sentences. Every time we pass on a case, essentially, we're acknowledging that that person is most likely going to die in prison. And that is an extremely difficult thing to acknowledge and to accept. But it is, finding a needle in a haystack, the cases that both we believe in their innocence and we can do something about it. And so it's definitely, the tip of the iceberg. It's definitely not that we are finding all of the cases out there and proving their innocence and getting them out.
Thank you. So, Tim, I want to ask you, how was being a 17-year-old incarcerated? How was that experience for you, being so young inside of prison?
I mean, it was a terrible experience. It was basically like living a nightmare. Full of disbelief, scared. It's hard to explain. Because every day you sitting in there and you know that you haven't taken anyone's life, and all these different people saying all this different stuff about you. You did this, you did that, and it was just a nightmare.
I have a 17-year-old son right now, and I can't imagine him being incarcerated, like going through this experience. But how was this experience for you, knowing that you had 32 years on your sentence? This wasn't just, I'll be out in a couple years, but you were actually sentenced to 32 years.
Right. At one point while I was in there, I'll say like the first 8 years, it was a period to where, I just didn't care. I'm angry and mad all the time, wake up mad, like I'm still here. And I had told myself at one point, if they think I'm gonna sit up in here for the rest of my life, then I'm gonna make them kill me. I can't do this. It's just an all around terrible experience. I mean, you in there, and the stuff that you have to deal with while you're there. Even as far as going to visiting and you see your people, it's just dehumanizing the whole experience. And it gets to you. So I mean, we all know that being locked up in a cage is not normal for anybody. Because we're human beings, we're not animals, but unfortunately, some of us act like animals. But it just, the whole experience it's messed up, and it can really do damage to a person.
And do you feel like you were treated fairly with law enforcement, and were you treated fairly with the district attorney or even with your own attorney? Can you just talk about those?
Well, my attorney, he did everything he could, even to the point where he was even threatened with attempted court. But as far as the attorney and law enforcement, no. I mean, in my personal opinion, I believe that law enforcement knew I was innocent, but they just didn't care. They was under pressure to just arrest somebody. And as far as the district attorney is concerned, now that I know so much about the law and how things work and operate, you know, for me, it's sad because everybody that's a part of that, that's a part of the system, took an oath to do certain things. Well, I hope you understand regardless, but a lot of district attorneys get cases that they know ain't right. They take them anyway. You know, and it's like they don't have any values or morals. Their whole thing is about the justice system become about winning and losing. Regardless if you're innocent or guilty, it's like it's a game. You know, everybody forgot about the oath that they took. People are just worried about winning and losing. That's it. You know, they don't care that it's a human being sitting right there who life is in their hand. All that stuff don't matter. You know, it's about furthering your career, and that's it. You don't care who you knock down or who you got to walk on and step on, and that's what that system has become.
That's interesting that you say that. I did an internship at the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, and one of the things that I found out from the attorneys there was that there is no quota, but your job depends on your conviction rate. So if you're not getting convictions, you're not going to be at Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office for very long. So Alex, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, his case technically? Did he get a fair shake? Did he have good representation? And was there any misconduct? Or is this just the facts just didn't line up against him?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when we're talking about Tim's case has many of the hallmarks that we see of systemic issues in the criminal justice system. You know, so I guess relatively speaking, he got a fair shake because it's an unfair shake for almost everybody who goes through the criminal justice system. You know, the investigators in the case, I think Tim was absolutely right, were more interested in obtaining an arrest and seeing a case closed than they were in finding out the truth of the situation. I think the prosecutor was not interested in making sure that the evidence that they were presenting against Tim was solid and credible. And this is the type of stuff that we see in the criminal justice system on the wrongful convictions side of things. There are people who have extremely similar stories, that the eyewitnesses misidentified this individual because of, you know, problems with cross-racial misidentification, for example. The witnesses were told that they were either going to get a deal for their testimony, or if they didn't testify in a particular way, then they were going to get some charges levied against them. You know, the interesting thing about the criminal justice system is that we, you know, when there's a plane crash, we make sure that we ground all of the planes of the same type. You know, everyone remember 737 MAX, right? We all make sure that the issue with regards to the plane, if it's a mechanical problem, is addressed across every single plane that's in the air. And we don't do that with the criminal justice system. We treat every single thing, every wrongful conviction, as an isolated incident. That Tim's case is somehow different from all of the other cases that involve eyewitnesses, and it's not. That Tim's case is somewhat different than cases where witnesses are being pressured to give testimony. It's not. These cases are all over the place, and they are rampant. And you know, until we address these systemic problems and also address the severe issues of systemic problems having to do with criminal prosecutions affecting people of color more than than white people, then I think we're going to have some of the same problems going forward. That is exactly some of the issues that we see in the criminal justice system in almost every case.
So, Mr. Pearson, we had a question from the audience, if I may interrupt. The question is directed to you, Alex, and the question was, what evidence is most successful to get the court to overturn these convictions?
Yeah, so what evidence is most successful? I mean, obviously, if we have DNA evidence showing that another person has been identified as the true perpetrator, then that is pretty good. I say pretty good because I've had cases where we have, the case that we had in San Diego was an individual who was convicted of sexual assault. We found some DNA evidence that at the time was not able to be tested because the technology wasn't there yet. We got a DNA profile, we ran it through the DNA database, we got a match to somebody who looked just like the guy, who lived 2 miles away from where the crime occurred and was a convicted sex offender. And even in that situation, the prosecutor said, it's a possibility that the California Innocence Project planted that profile to try to, get their person out of custody for a crime that they actually committed. So, in terms of, what is the best type of evidence, it really depends. I will say that if you look at some of the statistics, the biggest problem with the criminal justice system is eyewitness misidentification. It plays a factor in about 3/4 of the wrongful convictions that we see across the country. But you also see things like bad forensic science, which plays a factor in about 15 to 17%. People who believe that they can find a bite mark when no bite mark exists. Police or prosecutorial misconduct is about 20 to 25%. People hiding evidence, withholding evidence that's exculpatory or impeaching of their own witnesses. So, there are a number of factors that you see that repeat in all wrongful convictions. And so there's no really great way to unring the bell in some of these cases. That's why there's so few wrongful conviction reversals, even though the wrongful conviction problem is much larger.
Thank you, Alex. And I'd like to say, in addition to having Alex and Timothy speak, we have another speaker who's joined us, and I would like to go ahead and introduce her and continue the conversation. Elected in November of 2016, State Senator Nancy Skinner is joining us tonight. She represents California's 9th Senate District, which includes the cities of Alameda, Albany, Berkeley, El Cerrito, Emeryville, El Sobrante, Hercules, Houston, Oakland, Piedmont, Pinole, Richmond, Rodeo, San Leandro, and San Pablo. A social justice advocate, energy and climate change trailblazer, and accomplished legislator, Skinner completed 3 terms in the state assembly. In the state Senate, Nancy Skinner serves on 8 committees and is the chair of the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Budget Committee. She has authored 2 landmark criminal justice reform laws, opening up police misconduct records for the first time in 40 years and overhauling California's outdated and unfair felony murder rule. Many of us practicing attorneys know how that has worked and when that happened. She has also authored laws to address California's She's also authored laws to address California's housing crisis and protect the environment and cut greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2019, she authored the Fair Pay to Play Act, Assembly Bill 206, which made California the first in the nation to allow college athletes to earn money from their name, image, and likeness. That being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce and welcome our other panelist, Senator Nancy Skinner. Michael, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Great to see you all. Or evening. It's evening already. Great to see you all. Glad to be part of it. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining our panel. We are honored to have you here. And actually, I have a question for you, but I wanted Alex to talk about a little bit about how did you ultimately get Tim out of jail?
So we were all ultimately able to get Tim out of prison based on a kind of a two-pronged approach, that the evidence that showed this person saying Tim confessed to the crime was false. And the way we were able to show that is because she came to court and said that she had lied. And so it was a kind of a combination of false evidence, new evidence claim. So procedurally, the interesting thing, I say interesting, but it's not obviously very interesting for Tim. It only took 2 years, to get Tim's conviction reversed. It took 12 years for us to get compensation for Tim for his years of wrongful incarceration. And the reason I mention that is because it was extremely frustrating and unbelievably slow. And one of the things that Senator Skinner was trying to do to address when we presented these issues to her in public safety. So one of the things that we have been trying to get, and Senator Skinner was an amazing champion of trying to get this, is to get compensation automatically for people who've been wrongfully convicted and have established their innocence. And unfortunately, we weren't successful in that for probably extremely busy and Kafka-esque rules that Senator Skinner knows better than I do about how the state Senate works. But that is one of the things that she's been a champion for all of our cases, is trying to make sure that people who've been wrongfully convicted are able to move on with their lives. And so that's why I'm really thankful and happy to see her on this Zoom call.
And I wanted you to mention that before we brought Senator Skinner into this, because Mr. Atkins, Tim is exactly the kind of person that she has been fighting for. He has spent 23 years in prison, lost more than half of his life he spent in prison, and he had another 12-year battle to get compensated for the wrongful conviction. So this is what she's been working for. So Senator, could you talk a little bit about how long you've been working on criminal justice reform, and why was the compensation initiative important for you?
Right. Thank you. So I got, as mentioned in the intro, I was first elected to the legislature in 2008 in the state assembly, and I was immediately put by the then speaker, Karen Bass, on the public safety committee. And I don't even know if I asked for it. I'm sure I didn't, to be honest. But when I first met with Speaker Bass, I mentioned her that one of my reasons for running was to deal with the fact that, to begin to correct the fact that California was the poster child for mass incarceration. And so she immediately said to me, well, then you have to be on the public safety committee. And she was also my mentor. And I think all of us know, who follow Congresswoman Bass, that she is quite progressive on these issues and has been a great champion for correcting the incredible injustices in what I would call our injustice system. Now, on the innocence issue, people don't like to accept when they're wrong. That's basically a human trait. And I have a fear that even though we were successful in the budget, I was able to get 50, I forget how much, wasn't that great of funding, but let me look exactly. It was 50,000 one time. That's, again, just a drop in the bucket, to the After Innocence Project to support their work with people that had been released after being wrongfully convicted. But to my point of view, if the state, the only way you can be wrongfully convicted is by a government action. And so the government has removed your rights, and not only has removed your rights, has eliminated you from being able to earn economically. It has affected it's affected you, it's affected your family, and then your ability to earn if you are successful at proving that you were wrongfully convicted, you still have an albatross around your neck. That's just the reality of our conviction system. And so from my point of view, the government owes you. We owe you. We owe you. If we put you in that position in the first place, it was only our act that did that. And I think the fact that we have not been successful yet is because governments in general, and I don't mean just in, governments in general, but people in general don't like to, they prefer to hide behind when they make, a mistake. And so to actually guarantee that someone is compensated for that wrongful conviction is kind of like that much more salt in the wound of the government action that created it. But we have to try again, and we shouldn't give up. And $50,000 to the After Innocence Project is just not adequate. Anyway, and there are ways that folks can finally get relief, but the meaning some compensation, but the amount of hoops that we make people jump through is just unconscionable. But we'll stop there.
So why has this been a priority for you, this particular cause?
Well, as I mentioned, I didn't campaign on this when I ran in 2008, but I have been very struck by many wise people that either I read books by or heard speak. So for example, Angela Davis is one of them. And Angela Davis, I'm referring now to her, she's now very well known as someone who is an advocate for decarceration. But I'm talking about my first encounter was the 70s. And even then she was extremely articulate about she made the connections between our prison system and our injustice system and basically legacy of slavery. And that really struck me. She was the first one who made those connections for me. And she's also the first one who gave the whole history even of what was the origin of police departments in the United States. And those things, so I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley at the time. And those things were just like burned indelibly in my brain. And as time went on and I watched California, I mean, when you look at what our prison population was at the point that she was talking about these things, it was small. It was not really out of balance with any other state in the country. But in the time since 1970 to today, and fortunately we're down some in numbers, we grew beyond it's just absurd, to the point where we had, I think at its peak, about 180 to 190,000 people within our state prison system. That doesn't even include within our juvenile systems or with our jails. We're now down to about 100,000, but it is still higher per capita than any other state. And so I looked at it as not only injustice, and then of course with when you can't help, and the data is so obvious, you can't hide behind the fact that it is racially biased and income biased. And then when you add on top of that it is eating up more and more of what we call our discretionary general fund, because a lot of people don't really understand the state's budget, but most of the money that we have, it is tied to certain, we don't have discretion. We must use it for certain things. But the one huge expenditure that is 100% discretionary, the only mandate is those laws we put in in place ourselves. The only reason that we have a $13 billion corrections budget is because of statutes that either voters or we put into place. And it's a terrible waste of very important money that could instead be being used, for example, for early care and education of little kids, for higher education, for any number of things. And so that's really what it was, those early influences of people like Angela Davis, there were others, and then watching California become, in effect, the poster child for mass incarceration, that I decided that if I ever were in the legislature, my commitment, my focus had to be to begin to reverse those things and correct them and cut down that population.
I believe we have an audience question.
We do. I have to unmute myself to give it to you guys. So both to all three of our panelists, one of the things that we're doing by having this tonight is to bring light to the racial disparities and systemic racism embedded in society and our legal system. And so we had a question to that effect about where do we start here? And the question was, what are the 3 immediate systemic changes that we can focus on right now so that we can start getting this work done?
Well, I'll let someone else do the 3 immediate now, but I want to just describe, because a lot of people may not realize what we have done. So just in this last session, and those of you who followed the legislature, this last legislative session was kind of messy. It didn't really, a lot of bills didn't get through. It was not our shining moment. However, there were some very important reforms that got through. So one of the bills that got signed into law was by my colleague, Assemblymember Ashkara, and that bill basically requires our entire court system, DAs, judges, everyone, to have to look at the offense that has been brought before them and look at it from, or analyze it from a racial lens. So before they go to the point of like figuring out the charge, and you know that we have lots of statutes that are called wobblers, you know, misdemeanor or felony. We also have much discretion judges have for things like enhancements and such. While there's less discretion than would be good, there is still much discretion. And basically his Racial Justice Act requires now all prosecutors and all judges to have to analyze the circumstances of the crime, what's being charged, and how the whole process is going to go down from a racial lens, which will change everything. Now, of course, it is partly going to be dependent on the human factor of how these people operate, but it is a statute now. And so that means we can hold them accountable. So that was huge, just huge. And then we've also now, I carried a bill that has allowed, we prevented anyone who had a felony conviction from ever, lifetime jury service, ever, didn't matter. You know, you could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years past your time of serving, past parole, everything, and yet you still could never be on a jury. Now, you are allowed to be on a jury due to my bill. And now, of course, we're even going to allow, due to the voters, we're even going to allow those people who are on parole to vote, which is great. So those, when I say that, and you wonder, okay, what does that have to do with anything? By virtue of what we had in place, we were excluding a large percent, you know, part of the jury service has got to be a jury of your peers. And when you look at mostly who then is tried in court, being Brown and Latinx, and also that those folks are the people most likely to have convictions. Once you excluded them, you guaranteed that you could not have a jury of your peers. So, and that of course alone has a racist impact. So meaning on the then consequences of any trial and any jury decision. So we've eliminated those things. And there's a number of other things that we have done recently that I think are great improvements. Not, well, Ms. Weber, Assemblymember Weber's bills around requiring police departments to have to give us data every year on the demographics of their stops and their arrests. So we can see right away, you know, whether are the majority of stops being made against Latinx and Black people or API people, or is it, you know, what? I mean, I always used to joke, I'm a native San Franciscan, and you know, I don't live there now. I haven't lived there in years, but anytime I go to San Francisco and I live nearby, and of course now cannabis is legal, but prior to cannabis legality, it didn't matter when I was in San Francisco. It didn't matter. For the last 25, 30 years, no matter where I went in San Francisco, and I'm telling you anywhere, whether it was Union Square, the baseball game, wherever I went, walking down any street, whether it's Pacific Heights, Nob Hill, Mission, or Bayview, I smell pot. You smell everybody, you saw people using cannabis. And yet then you looked at the arrest record and conviction record of cannabis use in San Francisco, it was over 70% African-American, with a population of less than 6% African-American in the town. And I was like, you have to, I mean, to find a Black person smoking pot in San Francisco before it was legal, you had to turn up every damn stone. It was so difficult, right? But you could find a white person the minute you walked out of any building. You'd see a white person using cannabis in an open and public way. Were they arrested? No. So, I mean, it's just so obvious. But anyway, we now have the data, we can prove it, and it will hopefully, again, we have the ability now to hold these agencies accountable. And then I also now have, where under my new police records bill, which I just reintroduced, we will be able to get records on officers who have a history of racist and biased conduct. So we will be able to get that. And of course, I'm making a big assumption here that it passes and gets signed into law. But given that it had 53 votes in the assembly in the last session, and the governor had already indicated he's willing to, I have pretty strong confidence that it will succeed. But I'll let other people say what they think else we need.
Actually, Alex, did you have something that looked like you were reaching for your mute button?
I was going to echo a couple of the things. The Racial Justice Act is a game changer for the state of California. We are now able to establish that either the investigation was racially motivated, the prosecution, the conviction, the sentence was racially motivated, and able to use statistical analysis to show that, you know, the proportion of African Americans in that particular county is X. The number of African Americans that are prosecuted and convicted is Y. If it is higher, then it shows that there's some sort of racial bias when it comes to the things. That's why we are one of the co-sponsors of that bill. We were very happy to see that is something that has passed. We're in the implementation working group to try to figure out how to make all of this stuff happen without making everybody insane. And some of the things that Senator Skinner is talking about are also things that I think are really helpful. You know, having more transparency in investigations and prosecutions is really key. One of the things that I really think is very important is to try to have open discovery. You know, what does the prosecutor have? Not necessarily just what the prosecutor has that shows that the person is innocent. What does the prosecutor have at all? Why don't we just give the file to the defense attorney to find out what the case is actually about? And one of the things that I would be probably shamed in my office if I didn't plug for is one of the ways that we can make sure, the best thing that we can make sure that the criminal justice system changes is by giving to places like the California Innocence Project. Every single case that we have that we get a wrongful conviction reversed, it costs the state of California about $75,000 to house an individual for a year. So for Tim's case, if you extrapolate that to the 23 years,
actually, it's higher now. It's $85,000 a year.
Okay, well, I can't do the math that fast. If it was 75,000, then we have saved the state of California $1.7 million. So every single case that we get where the person's conviction is reversed and they're found to be wrongfully convicted and they get out of prison, we save the state of California money. So if you're interested in changing the system, one of the easiest, the best ways to do it is by supporting causes like the California Innocence Project, donating your time, donating to us at CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org. It is real change that can be effectuated.
Okay. Tim, thank you. Tim, it's February 9th, 2007. You've just spent 23 years in jail. You were incarcerated since you were 17. You're 40 years old. What do you do now? What happens? What was the impact on you and your family just being released at 40?
I mean, the impact was crazy, especially for me. It was like, I thought I walked into a whole different planet, different world. You know, so when I walked out of there, it was everybody walking up and down the street on cell phones, and I didn't know what was going on. And my little brother handed me a cell phone and told me, "Here, man, you can have this." But it started playing music. I didn't even know how to answer it. So, you know, it was an experience.
What kind of impact did that have on you?
I mean, the impact, it scared me a little bit, but I knew I was gonna have to get used to it. You know, now I'm out here, I'm gonna have to deal with this, but I was a little messed up when I came home and everybody didn't know it. So what I did was I had to go to counseling. You know, I had to get away from my family, get away from my friends. I had to go sit down and talk to somebody that didn't know me. You know, so I can really express myself. Because when you do that with your family and friends, they tend to tell you things that they think you want to hear. You know, so I had to go find a counselor and sit down and and really do some work because I was a little messed up.
And Tim, I have a follow-up question for you. Can you vote now? Have you voted? I know this is a really big election.
Well, no, I haven't voted. I can vote, but I got, it's something about that just don't sit well with me.
Okay.
You know, the whole voting experience. You know, after that stuff happened to Al Gore, it made me look at things in a whole different light.
How about being on a jury? Have you served on a jury or even been able to enter a courthouse in a good light?
They gave me, they gave me like 4 different notices to come serve on the jury, but I just go up there and let them know I don't want to be a part of it. Because for me, it's like, I believe that the whole system needs to be gutted and revamped. You know, I've been a part of sitting in court, been a part of trial, and the one thing that I can't understand about a person fighting a case or any DA or lawyers dealing with a case is why would you try to exclude certain evidence and leave certain evidence? My thing is, if all this stuff has to do with the case, put it all on the table. You know, don't try to hide this or get this kicked out, to make the scales uneven. If all this stuff is pertaining to this case, why shouldn't everybody have a chance to look at this? Because if you have half the information, then 9 times out of 10, you're not going to make the right decision.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think to that point, I think just is having forums like we're sitting in now with the conversation we're having and the audience that we have now. And I just want to just say we have Contra Costa County District Attorney Diana Becton, who's joined the conversation. I appreciate your appearance tonight, DA Becton. And we have another question from the audience, and I would welcome Senator Skinner, Mr. Simpson, and not to put you on the spot, DA Becton, but if you're interested in answering, where are we now with the efforts to require police to record statements, admissions, and confessions before they can be used in a criminal case is one of the audience questions.
I don't know if that's required. DA Becton, are you familiar with whether we require that?
Recording statements is certainly, there's nothing right now that we have that would require it. Right. But what a thoughtful question. Yeah. And perhaps that's a space to think about some future legislation. But there's nothing right now that would require such a recording. Right. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Can I interject for a minute?
Go right ahead, Mr. Atkins.
I believe, let me see. Alex, you remember when I went to when I go in front of the Senate?
Yeah.
I testified in front of the Senate for police interrogations to be audio and video recorded. So that way, the person that's being arrested can't lie and say the police did something, or the police can't lie and say that this person said something that he didn't say. Which I think that's even for both sides. But I believe it passed and Arnold vetoed it. And my question for that is, why it seems like dealing with the justice system, a lot of stuff people try to hide. I mean, if justice is what everybody truly believes in, then should nothing be hidden?
I think that's a great question. I think that leads to another question that we can pitch to the other panelists as well is, what do you all believe are the barriers to passing criminal justice reform legislation?
I mean, I don't know that we have that much time. There's so many different things that we could say. What are the barriers? I think a lot of times, the concern is that what we're talking about, the barriers that we see, and Tim raises a point. We were successful in getting interrogations, police interviews recorded, and that's the requirement now. But the things that we saw that were the pushback were things like, sorry, my dog is just eating a treat in the background. I apologize. There's nobody dying just out of frame here. It's just he's very loud. I apologize. The things that we saw were that people would say that, oh, it's going to open the floodgates of litigation, and then it's going to cost too much to implement. And, with regards to the cost, I think it's the frustrating thing is, everybody's got a phone with a recording app on it. With regards to opening the floodgates, I think one of the things that we've seen in terms of implementing some of these reforms is that it helps to improve both the integrity of the system and the perception of integrity in the system. That people, if we have body cams, if we have interviews that are recorded, if we have eyewitness identification procedures that are recorded, then when we get to the point that the person is being prosecuted, that the conviction is more secure and people feel more confident in the criminal justice system generally, because people believe that they can see for their own eyes whether or not something has happened or not happened. So I think, the pushback that we always get is that it's going to cost too much, or you're going to see a bunch of lawsuits if we implement it. And I really think that neither one of those things really holds a lot of water.
I think the other side of that to consider as well is really the public. The public is starting to push back, because in the age of so much technology and so many resources available to us, it's interesting. I'm just thinking back when I was sitting as a judge listening to jury trials, that there would be so many times when jurors would now expect that there would be a recording or expect that there would be a video, because it's like, why not? If you have this technology available to you, like, why wouldn't you use it in this situation? And I think what's happening as well is that is sort of starting to creep into the minds of people, because 24/7 we're like bombarded with images, and so people are listening to evidence and they're like wondering, well, why don't we have a video, or why don't we have a recording? So I think that we can see the public perception on this issue is starting to shift as well.
And I want to throw something out to the panelists. How much do you think that race play in this process of these wrongful convictions, or in the reforms that need to happen? How much does race actually play a factor in this? Or is it money? People with money can get off?
Okay, it's race in that our entire, you just look, when we talk about implicit bias, you can look at all the studies, and it doesn't matter even what color you are. When they do these kind of questionnaires or surveys, and people pick the person of color as the criminal almost always, no matter what else they're presented. And so that's how deep the racial bias is within our culture, and it's just very deep. So there's that. But that it's not so much that the legislature, if we're talking about why those bills don't get through, that the legislature is looking through the lens of, somehow I'm going to get more repercussions because I corrected a racially biased. No, that's not the issue. It's that even though we have the quote unquote assumption in our laws that you're innocent till proven guilty, I think in fact, the societal perception is you're guilty until proven innocent. And that's just an operative, and the prosecutors utilize it to great advantage. So it makes it then hard. When there's high profile crimes, or we also talk about the perception that people still think that violent crime is very high. Now, unfortunately, gun violence has gone up some under the pandemic. But if we look at the data, the last 10 years, minimal 10 years, violent crime has been going down each year. And yet if you query the public, they think that it is just as prevalent and just as, as ever. There's been no change. And so that also affects when a legislature is making a decision, because they don't want to get the pushback from their constituents.
How about you, Alex? What do you think race is in this overall grand scheme of things?
I mean, I think race plays a huge factor in the criminal justice system generally. I don't think, if you look at the statistics, if you look at how the criminal justice system is implemented, if you look at the number of people who are incarcerated, it is pervasive. It is the reason why we have the Racial Justice Act. It is the reason why that's probably, just only the first step in addressing some of these very systemic issues. I don't think that if you're looking at it from a serious perspective, and I think some of the things that we often kind of tell ourselves is that in any individual case, with any individual investigation or any individual prosecution, that person is not, conducting themselves in a way that is where race is a factor. And if that were true in the aggregate, then you wouldn't see the same disparity that you do see in how the criminal justice system affects people of color. I think there's no real way to argue that in terms of the concept, the criminal justice system, you could at least make an argument that it is kind of race neutral. In the implementation, it is not.
Wow, that was.
We had another audience question that said, how many and we had another audience question, thank you, Alex, that said, how many wrongful convictions arose from bench trials? I think they're saying juxtaposed to jury trials. Anybody have any of those figures, or whether or not there is a higher likelihood for them to come from jury?
I don't have those figures. Usually bench trials are fairly uncommon. So I can't say, as a friend of mine down here says, bench trial is often a slow plea of guilty. So, most of the time people, if they're going to trial, they're going to go in front of a jury. So most of the wrongful convictions and most of the convictions generally are in front of juries. Or through, obviously, the majority of them of convictions generally are plea agreements, right? So, we're talking about the very small percentage of cases, 2-3% of cases that actually get resolved through a trial at all. We don't really have a criminal justice system. We have a criminal plea bargaining system. So of those 2 or 3% that actually go to trial, most of them are juries.
I have another question for Tim. Do you feel like you were welcomed back into society after you were released and exonerated?
No, I feel like I was through back into society. I mean, some people, welcome me, but some was scared. You have to look at things like this. Here's a person just been in prison and spent 23 years. Some people automatically thinking, oh, this dude is a nut, or they scared, they don't know how I'm gonna react to certain things. But a lot of people welcome me with open arms. You know, but as I stated to you earlier, I had to get myself together before I really dealt with people, because prison, you know, really worked a number on me. So I had to go do something for myself and make sure that I was okay before I really start dealing with people.
You know, Tim, some people might say, well, you know what, this guy made out good. He had spent a couple of years in jail, but he's a millionaire now. What do you have to say to the person that thinks that way?
I mean, wait a minute, I'm laughing.
I thought it would make you laugh,
they gave me
but I have to.
$1.1 million. That don't make you a millionaire. $1 million is like having these days what $100 or something. But I mean, it's not the point about the money. Because in my personal opinion, it's not enough money being printed that they can pay me to do 23 years. You know, that's time out my life that I'll never be able to get back. You know, I lost a lot of people in that time that I'll never be able to see again. I mean, and people have the wrong concept when it comes to money anyway. Money was created for trade. That's it. You know, so, I mean, in my opinion, the thing that makes me wealthy is the people in my life that care about me. You know, that's how I look at wealth. So, I mean, something wrong with them anyway if they dwelling on money. Because I'm not. I wish I could have had it 23 years back.
And we really appreciate you sharing and being open and vulnerable to us. We really appreciate you being so honest. We've had this discussion and we've started our series. We talked about race before. We talked about just some of the things that's going on in our country right now. But where do we go from here? Like, what can we actually do to make changes? Like, what's our call to action? What could everyone on this call, what could they do to make a change? And I'm going to pick on you first, Alex. I think that you are.
Boy, there's so many different things I would say in terms of getting involved, you know, educate yourself about these issues. I think one of the greatest things about this whole Zoom call and the fact that everybody is here is because you're interested in trying to resolve some of these things. So, you know, look at some of the statistics with regards to the criminal justice system. You know, for example, 13% of the population is African-American, close to 50% of the population in prison. You know, that's something that I think is a very sobering statistic that people don't really know about. So educate yourselves. Talk to other people. If you have people who are a little bit more conservative than you, then just let them know that, you know, every wrongful conviction means that we're closer to finding the real person. So that's another reason why you should support organizations like the California Innocence Project. And I see in the chat, Heidi Taylor makes a very good point. Donate to the California Innocence Project, californiainnocenceproject.org. We are extremely enthusiastic. Again, I apologize for my dog. My dog is very enthusiastic as well. He has some respiratory issues, but it's not about the criminal justice system. But your involvement and participation by donating to the California Innocence Project goes an incredibly long way. You know, we get to represent and resolve cases like Timothy Atkins, and we can, you know, together help to improve and preserve the integrity of the criminal justice system through that sort of work. So that's what I would say.
I'd add that I think some of you may have observed what the new DA in LA, Mr. Gascon, what he put forward now. He is no longer going to charge, LA will no longer charge death penalty. They're not going to try any person 18 or under as an adult. So they'll try all juveniles as juveniles. He's eliminated cash bail. He has taken, he's also eliminating enhancements, which the prosecutor, those are discretionary if a prosecutor brings them forward. It's not required. Yes, there are enhancements that were put in by initiative, but they are not at their, and so it makes it hard because they were put in by initiative for the legislature to get rid of them. However, there's still a level of discretion by the prosecutor and by the judge. So he has taken that on, and he's taken on 3 strikes. So I think we don't know what kind of reaction there will be to those announcements and to his practice as time goes on. But I think being able to engage as there's reactions to those, engaging into why what he is trying to pursue, why it makes sense, and then trying to help people keep an open mind to these things. The Governor Newsom, it was an initiative that actually was started by Governor Brown, but Governor Newsom is the one who put it in, who actualized it, was this commission on the full review of the penal code. And that commission exists right now. It's chaired by Mike Romano. Mike Romano, who is a lawyer at Stanford, who runs the 3 Strikes Project, and who not only reverses a lot of 3 strike convictions, but also works on reversing wrongful convictions. He's the chair. I serve on it. Assemblymember Sidney Comlager-Dove serves on it. A number of current judges and former judges like Moreno, and also former Senate Pro Tem Burton serves on it. And we are scheduled to meet Thursday, and you can watch it on a web, where we're going to adopt some recommendations that we're going to then put forward to the governor. So things like the recommendations that we're going to adopt are not quite as bold as what Gascon has put forward, but they're very good and they're very important. And I think paying attention to those and helping to support them and minimize negative reactions to them, all those are really important.
Well,
go ahead. I wanted to just say right before, because I don't want, if anyone has to leave, I want to make sure we make this announcement. And thank you both for the statement that you just made. But Alex mentioned about donating. One of the things that we can do to change is donating to the California Innocence Project. So I'm proud to announce that when the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity and Inclusion Committee met for the Contra Costa County Bar Association recently this week, there was a decision that was made that a donation will be made to the California Innocence Project and the East Bay Asian Youth Council. And in order to, we don't have a dollar amount yet because we're fundraising. So we're asking everyone who's on this call, if you're interested in sponsoring, we're raising funds through our Lunar New Year event that's set to happen on February 18, 2021. Right now in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and paste a link for you all to go ahead and sign up for that event, as well as sign up for charitable contributions. You can contact the director of the Contra Costa County Bar Association, who's with us right now, Teresa Hurley. Teresa, if you wave. Teresa, there she is. And Teresa, and we would love to get as much as we can for a cause like this. So Alex, thank you so much for saying that.
Well, thank you so much for selecting us as one of the charities. We are a nonprofit organization that runs off of goodwill and donations from people like yourself. And every dollar that you give to us goes to direct costs of representation. So all of us are paid through California Western School of Law. So if you donate to the California Innocence Project, that means that you are paying for DNA tests, for evidence collection, for litigation. And that is extremely helpful. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. And I just want to go kind of like off program, because Timothy, you said something to us and Michael kept talking to us. But everyone on this call, I challenge you, if you have a teenager, or if you've had a teenager, age 17, we're seeing Timothy as a grown man, but I would love for us to take a moment. If you could just take a quick moment, close your eyes. Imagine your 17-year-old self, or imagine your 17-year-old child. And in this moment, if we just take a deep breath and just imagine now, everything you hope for or dream for before you even reach the age of majority is stripped away and you're locked up, knowing you did absolutely nothing. If we can just sit in this moment. You remember you were probably a junior or a senior at this time in high school. the things that you hope for, you were looking forward to: prom, first dates, first kisses, first kiss. Some of you may want kisses, you might want multiple ones, but just all the things you hope for being stripped away. And then when you get out, you've been locked up for something you didn't do. You get out and you enter into a whole new world is how I experience what Tim said. It's like walking into the Jetsons. Sit in that moment. So I want to bring you back from that, because I think that moment, if we make it more real to ourselves, because I think we so often we see a person years later and we're like, oh, well, he's grown, or, oh, he has his money. But if we can go back to that moment for Tim. And Tim, I want to ask you where you are now. What are you doing now? Because I appreciate you said you've testified to at the Senate level. What other things have you been doing?
You're on mute, Tim. Turn your mute off, Tim.
Oh, sorry about that. I know I was mute. No, what I was saying, lately I haven't been doing anything because the schools is closed. But what a lot of people don't know, when I came home, I went to Cal State, LA, and got a certificate to do gang intervention. And I started working at a school called Venice Youthville. And I was the gang intervention specialist because I like working with kids. And so I spend my time counseling kids, trying to talk to kids, trying to keep kids off the streets, out of gangs. If some of them have drug problems, I was getting kids in drug rehab, all kind of stuff. I mean, because for me, it's like everything that I've been through and all the stuff that I know, it'll be all for nothing if I don't share it. And I try to share it with the kids. And I let them know, that I've been through what they're going through. Peer pressure, all that stuff. I've been through all that. But it's unfortunate that sometimes we encounter people in our lives that teach us all wrong things. You know what I'm saying? That's why I try to step in and do kids to try to help them out and put them on that right track so that they don't make that bad decision or that ultimate mistake that I made by even joining the game.
Thank you. And so often do we go to all the experts and the people who've been working in the field, but I'd like to, Tim, ask you, what do you think we need to do? Because you've been on the inside and you've been through this process. So what suggestions do you have that we can do to make changes?
Well, I mean, I'm a firm believer of this. We can change all the laws and do all this stuff, but if we don't have open dialogues, see, it starts with we have to change the heart of people. So you see racism and all that, you have to change the heart of people. Because you can make any law in the world pertaining to racism, pertaining to the justice system, but if we don't change the heart of the individuals that's in control, none of that stuff is gonna matter. Because they're gonna find a way around it.
I agree 1,000% with you, Pam. And I think that it came up earlier in one of our other town halls, just about that uncomfortable conversation, that we have to be willing to engage in that uncomfortable conversation for us to grow beyond this. We have to take those taboo things and actually put them on the table and discuss it. So I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I just stole that from one of the people in the chat, that phrase, but I think it does start with the heart, because you're right. We can change all the laws. We can do all this and make all this legislative action and changes, but that's not going to change the way people are still operating within society, because we have laws, we have things in place, but they're not being implemented, or they're being abused or used in a certain way that disenfranchise people. So we've talked about some of the issues. We've talked about some of the reforms. what are some of the hurdles that we have in the way to prevent us from making these kind of changes? What are the things that are in our way right now that we need to address? And that's for all of our panelists. I'm pointing that towards Senator Skinner. I know that we have a few hurdles that's in the way preventing us from having some of this change.
You know, I reflect on that a lot, and I was very heartened this after, I mean, not, I say very heartened, that's a weird way to put it because it was nothing to be heartened about in having the nation watch George Floyd be brutally murdered. But the response across the country crossed all racial lines, crossed all age lines. And now, did it yet make permanent change in people's attitudes? I don't know yet. But it was very, very, it was good to see. And there was backlash, as there always is in this, in the crazy country that we live in. But I think that the outpouring was greater than the backlash, and we will see over time. But I observed that, and it was good to see. What else and what more? I look to younger people because I think that their attitudes are better. I think it's not to say that racism is gone in any way, even amongst young people, but I think they're much more, their eyes are much more open. They're not so blinded by it. And I think that helps. And when I say young people, I mean 30 and under. That's my sense.
Before we go, we're here now, and we have a few more questions. We're almost at the end of this program, and we have a few more minutes. If anyone has any burning desires or any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And I'm going to open up this portion to our panelists. If there's one last thing you'd like for our people who are here, our participants, to know about criminal justice reform, about specifically any type of new reform you're trying to do, or any new laws you're trying to get passed, or what the Innocence Project is working on, this is the time that if you can share that with us.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about some of the things that we're doing right now. We have a bill that we are talking about in terms of getting rid of informants, confidential informants, for their testimony in the criminal proceedings. Obviously, paid informants or informants that have some motivation to testify against a particular person, it's extremely prejudicial. And that's, I think, one of the things that you see in other countries and other jurisdictions that simply just doesn't happen. And so that's one of the things that we in California are trying to do. We're also trying to improve compensation for those individuals who have been wrongfully convicted and have their convictions reversed. And we also have a bill to address some of the problems with forensic science and false scientific evidence being introduced against people in cases. Forensic science and scientific evidence in jury trials is significantly problematic because juries believe, that every case is like CSI. So, if you see, they do the luminol test, and then there you go, then it shows the guy did it or whatever. And I'm being a little flip about it, but it is one of those things that, juries kind of absorb and can accept even without really a lot of data or a lot of validation behind it. So that's some of the things that we're trying to do. We also have interest in trying to get fingerprints that have been introduced against individuals to be reanalyzed later. That's not something that you're entitled to post-conviction. So if you have a fingerprint, they say that it's you, and you get convicted of it, later on you can't ask for that fingerprint to be reanalyzed. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do. I think the takeaway for me, and I am so heartened to hear that, comments from Senator Skinner, in the chat here, it really is about all of these individuals being thoughtful and committed and connected to these issues. And I always go back to, although I think it's apocryphal, the Margaret Mead quote of, never doubt that a small group of committed individuals, thoughtful individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that is something that I really try to embody because, it does seem as though there are so many problems with this criminal justice system that really is just too big to solve. And every single one of the sea changes, every single one of the things that we now look back and are like, oh, well, of course it had to have happened that way. That started because somebody said, you know what, I think this whole problem can be addressed with me and people who are committed. And so that's why I'm so thankful to see everybody here. That's definitely the start that we want to see.
Thank you, Alex. And Senator Skinner, I think we'll end with you, but I want to come to Timothy. Timothy, I want to let you know that someone sent to me privately that they hope that you know that not being where you should have been that night does not mean that you should have been thrown in jail for most of your life. We all did stupid things at 17, but did not pay the ultimate price. And so we'll go to you on any final thoughts that you would like to share with the group or anything you'd like to add.
Are you talking to me?
Yep.
I mean, first of all, I would like to thank you all for even having me on here. And, as I've stated earlier, the best way to begin to even start to make a change, is open dialogue and start to try to connect with people and change the heart of people. That's one of the biggest problems with human beings is we don't know anything about each of us have that fear. The way to break away from that fear is with dialogue, open dialogue. Because a lot of people have misunderstandings about people until they talk to them. So I believe it begins with open dialogue and hopefully changing the hearts of people. Because without changing the hearts of people, I don't think anything is going to change. Actually, I just don't believe it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We're honored to be in your presence. And Senator Skinner, Senator Skinner, that's a tongue twister. What are your thoughts and comments?
Well, I'm very glad to hear, Alex, the legislation that you all are, looking at pursuing. Those are good. I think I mentioned the things that the Penal Code Review Commission is going to look at on Thursday, and some of that will be translated into bills that different members in the legislature put forward. So that, and I will likely be one of the people who put some of those forward. We just haven't landed yet on what. But obviously my new police records bill, and that police records bill, I'll just mention that it does bear on our discussion, because right now the only records that we can access, as good as my original law was, the only misconduct records we can access are those records that are related to an officer's actually shooting a gun, so certain use of force. Also, proven sexual assault on the job. And then the other category was tampering with a witness or tampering with evidence. That's a pretty narrow set of records. And the new law is going to allow us to be able to access records on officers with a history of wrongful arrests and searches. So that will help on the innocence part, because wrongful arrests and searches very commonly end up, of course, leading to convictions that are for innocent people. Also, it will give us records on officers with a history of biased and discriminatory conduct. And it greatly expands the categories of force that one would be able to get records on. Because if we take Derek Chauvin, for example, in the George Floyd case, He had never actually shot someone prior, but he had lots of incidents of use of force. And under California's law, we would not know that unless the first incident we would know about is if he actually used the weapon. Now this new law will give way more categories. So I think that'll help. But I just wanted to thank Timothy for sharing his personal experiences. And I agree with you. There's no amount of money that could either pay me to be willing to spend any time in prison or compensate me if I ended up. And I think these conversations, I'm sure there's somebody who didn't engage in criminal behavior at some point in their life, but it's very few. And if people really looked honestly at themselves, I engaged in criminal behavior, but I did not worry much about, conviction was not the issue on my mind. And did I understand why? No, I didn't sit around and think, oh, because I'm a privileged white girl. No, but I did not so much, I was worried about other consequences potentially. I think once people really think about it and they think about that unfairness of who actually even gets arrested and who even gets convicted. So beyond just whether you were wrongfully convicted, it's just that so many people engage in criminal behavior and have no consequence because of just the way our laws are enforced and who is even stopped. So I think all of those things people need to be honest about that.
I would like to thank all of our panelists. Senator Skinner, that is a tongue twister. I almost lost it there. Mr. Atkins, thank you, Tim. Mr. Simpson, thank you, Alex. You have been a wonderful, and I actually want to thank the DA, Diane Becton, for jumping on our panel a little bit. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I just want to give another thanks to the panel, the committee that put this together: Julie, Kiana, Vanessa, Patanisha, and Heidi, and Teresa. You guys have been amazing to work with to put this together. We need more conversations like this. We need more programs like this. We need to find solutions and work together and open a dialogue. On behalf of the committee, on behalf of the Contra Costa County Bar Association, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and to look forward to some of our upcoming events and call of action. I said this time I wanted a call to action. I want everyone to either make a donation, donate your time, donate your money, donate your efforts, and to making a change. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore. Don't let it go by you. So don't watch it, actually get in the game. I want everyone to be in the game. So thank you so much for joining us. And this will be recorded. So if anyone missed anything, I want to join in later. You're more than welcome to a recording of this. And, okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you and good night. Good night.